was a thriving fishery once upon a time until about 1999 the population crashed. So what once supported almost 100 commercial lobstermen, I think we're down to under 10 now. So we're in the Thames River today trying to grapple up as many of these ghost pots, as they're called, or derelict lobster traps as possible. 01, this is 2002. This is 03, this is the most recent one, this white one.
So what we've found over time, about 50 years is our long-term data set now. We're seeing increased pH levels. We're also seeing increased temperatures. So water is warming here. And we're seeing shifts in species population. So the colder water creatures, we're seeing their numbers on the decline, while the organisms that prefer warmer water, we're tending to see their numbers increase.
When you say that the temperature of Long Island Sound has increased by 2 degrees Celsius, it doesn't sound like a lot, over 20 years. But biologically speaking, that is very significant. Lobsters were already at the southern end of their range in Long Island Sound, New Jersey, so you've got to figure they were probably already in waters that were about as warm as they could tolerate. So a couple degrees is all it can take to cause them to not thrive, not be successful here. The die-off was an abrupt event. However, the fact that more of them aren't coming in must mean that something about this environment isn't suitable for them anymore.
I grew up in Connecticut in the 1970s. I was born in the late 1960s, and Connecticut in the 70s was still a fairly, there was a lot more farms, there was a lot more woods, it was a pretty interesting time. I was very little when I first went to Long Island Sound. I probably don't even remember the first time. I do remember going to my grandmother's house one time over on Long Island when, I don't know, I was maybe 2 or 3. It was my first starfish. So that's always been burned in my memory. This little tiny starfish as a kid just filled me with wonder. Once you start dancing with nature as a little kid, you understand the subtleties and the messages that are out there, and the absolute wonder that all these systems are occurring, all these nutrient cycles, all these life cycles, and there's boundless numbers of them going on right underneath us now. And so I think it's just an awe. And so even in an urban sea like we have now, there's still a lot going on. There's a lot of mystique and a lot of natural dances happening. Long Island Sound's not that old. Maybe 12,000 years ago, it was a lake, and then it blew out into the ocean, and now we have Long Island Sound. So it's relatively young geologically, and it's flat, and it has a little notch at the end, but it's pretty shallow body of water for salt water. So what that does is it warms up and creates all these currents and cycles, and it has a lot of bays and harbors. There's over 100 little nooks and crannies. And so those are all places where the nutrients and the rivers are mixing. And what that does is create an incredible productivity.
This is an interesting geological area, right, in Connecticut. And the area between Watch Hill and the North Fork of Long Island was sort of a rocky dam. Rivers that were draining from these glaciers formed deltas where they went into the lake. But then when sea level dropped, when this dam at Montauk and Watch Hill gave up, the sound dropped and exposed these plains to the air, and so they grew trees and animals lived there, people lived there. And then sea level has been rising since then.